I can heal this one. Next mage that goes up, we might want to dampen, because I don't think we have a shield up right now. It's gigantic and just pure white, and my eye is blind for a second. Alright,
That was the wrong scene. Whoops. I forgot what scene I'm supposed to be on. Yeah, I had my Discord pulled up. I forgot we're reading, not playing a game. Okay, Pyro. Thank you for the shoutouts. Love you too. What's that? Oh, thank you for the follow, Godspeed. I will take a drink before I start reading. Also need to do the content warning. Thank you for the follow, Godspeed. We're reading... Oh, why am I angry? What did I do? Yeah, I don't know why I'm angry. Why am I angry? What did I don't know what buttons I pushed. What? Shift and 1? I didn't push. I did push those because I did an exclamation point. That's why. No, typing an exclamation point makes me angry, apparently. I do need to get my book out. There we go. You want me to raid Lazy Moop? Are they still gonna be streaming when I'm done? I haven't even started yet. I don't even have my timer out either. Yay, chalky chips. Okay, we're gonna be on chapter 2 this time. These chapters are really short. I looked ahead. There's only like 10 pages in this chapter. So I guess we're just gonna read a chapter every day. Unless I decide to read more than one chapter in a day. So we're on chapter 2, Aurelian. The luminous palace of summer was a spectacle of radiance. It was glittering stone and polished glass. It was elaborate, lifelike friezes and vaulted ceilings, many of them magicked to look instead like sunny sky. It was tremendous halls, gilded in gold and encrusted with so many pale jewels, the palace was never truly dark, even at night, for the way their faucets refracted light. But for all this splendor, never had Aurelian forgotten his first impression of this place, or the people who called it home. The brighter the light, the darker its shadows. 47 days, that's all there is between now and the summer solstice, a celebration that falls to us, this year, to host. Every head of every court, including the High King Azuraean himself, will be in attendance, and the Dark Star has set a bull troll loose in the foyer. A bull troll? Okay. Oh gosh, I'm so bad with names. Riadne Listern, Queen of the Steely Court of Summer, spoke in a voice that was quiet as still water. There was no need to shout. Every person in the room could hear her perfectly and was petrified by the stare she fixed on each of them in turn. The staircase, destroyed. The chandelier, in pieces. The pillars, the fixtures, the floor, the ceiling. This entire place is in ruins, and so I repeat, who laughed? Who thought this was funny? I will not ask again. Aurelian seethed internally. Most of the queen's servants were Cid Fae, but she also had several lay Cid Fae in her employment. Of course, there were no real visible difference between Cid and Lacid, save for the fact that Lacid had varying shades and intensity of golden eyes. What set them most apart from each other was magic. Cid Fae were tied to the elements of ice, water, fire, electricity, earth, stone, wind, and wood. But Lacid magic was tied to Aether, the force that held the entire universe together. Their power was most like what humans imagined of fairies. A Lacid could wave their hand like a wand and command magic to all sorts of things, like levitating objects and weaving greater illusions, and wiping away messes in the blink of an eye. Which meant that even as she stood here terrorizing her staff, her disaster of a foyer was nothing that couldn't be fixed by morning. Pointing this out right now would be a grave mistake, though. I already forgot how I pronounce this name. Riadne? I'm gonna have to look up like these names and how they're pronounced at some point. Was upset. She was fairly incandescent with it. The light she commanded as Queen of Summer glowing in a visible halo around her, and in this mood she would go from bad to worse with little instigation. Ah, sorry, Mother, that was me. If it weren't for the fact that Riadne... This name is so weird. Riadne? I guess is how I'm going to pronounce it. Rounded immediately on her son, Vihan, and Aurelian standing behind him. He could have groaned. It had not been the prince who'd snorted and set off the Seelie Queen's temper, but Vahan Lestern knew better than anyone else what this could turn into if left to spiral out of control, and was a noble fool besides. Vahan. Sorry, Vahan raised his hands in immediate surrender. Sorry, it was you who told the other courts that it was possible the Dark Star had something to do with all the Ironborn dying lately, so you're not actually surprised she retaliated, are you? How is it spelled? Riadne. I was typing in chat. Yeah. That. I have no idea how it's supposed to be pronounced, but I guess I've been pronouncing it Riadne. Is there like a... Be nice if there was like a appendix that had like pronunciations of weird words. Nope. What is this? If it'll load. Slovak?
Riadne.
Excuse me?
Riadne.
Why does it sound like they're adding extra syllables?
Riadne.
Yeah, it sounds like they're adding so many extra syllables in there.
Riadne.
That's so weird. So I guess Riadne is close. If I remember, that's how it's pronounced. I've lost my place now. Okay. I see where I'm at. They were nearing a dozen cases of Ironborn turning up dead here in Sealy Summer territory alone. Murdered was putting it kindly. Mauled beyond visible recognition was a better description. Scattered in pieces in various locations. No hint as to who could be the next target, save that every victim was an Ironborn child. The oldest they discovered had only been 19. Aurelian didn't blame the Ironborn community for their anger over the court's lack of action. He didn't blame them for turning to the only group of people who seemed to care. An illegal operation known as the Assistants. Yeah, that pronunciation was weird. It added like 2 or 3 extra syllables that aren't even written, which is strange, but I guess Riadne is close enough. The fairies and fae and even other humans who comprised its ranks worked diligently to ensure every new case was made public knowledge and couldn't be forgotten or covered up. It was the Assistants' involvement that necessitated the recent meeting between the Fae High Council and the heads of the courts. In an effort to appease the community, the council had gone with the High King's unusually hasty decision to name the infamous Dark Star a possible culprit, as suggested by Riadne. But Aurelian suspected even the Queen didn't truly believe the Dark Star was involved. It was funny how good the Fae had become at finding their ways around lies. You admire her. If Riadne's tone was any flatter, it would be concave. No, I don't. It's just that I don't think she actually did what she's been accused of, and if it were me, I wouldn't be happy either. I mean, she is a menace. The Dark Star has been terrorizing the magical community for over a century now. She does stupid things, reckless things, things that cost an awful lot to fix, and yes, things that have even led to others' injury, but no one has ever died because of her, and I don't believe she's the culprit. This wasn't her, but... Once again, Aurelian suppressed his desire to groan. He knew where the prince was going with this conversation, what he was about to say next. Judging by the look on the queen's face, she already knew as well. Vahan, Riadne warned. Listen to me, Vahan begged. There's more going on than we're seeing. This is bigger than handfuls of Ironborn dying. You've heard the rumors just like I have. Even the human police have started noticing that an awful lot of their street workers and homeless have gone missing. Someone is going around practically harvesting humans off the street right here in Nevada, in Sealy Summer territory, and it's connected. I know it's connected. I just don't know how yet. If you could just talk to the High King, or let me. I know he's forbidden our involvement, which is really questionable if you ask me. Why aren't we allowed to investigate this? He's always been so understanding, always been fair to his people. Maybe if he knew. Vahan. The queen's hand, viper-quick, darted to grab her son firmly by the jaw. Aurelian twitched and almost stepped forward, which would have been a fatal mistake, a challenge the queen would be all too happy to meet. He caught himself just in time. The relation between Vahan and his mother was subtle in appearance. Vahan looked much more like his late father, Vadrian, with his beauty and his suntanned golden complexion and stronger than standard build. Vahan's hair, however, black as the holes that devoured space, and his eyes, so bright a blue they seemed to spark like the electric element he and his mother wielded, that magic that was native to the Fae of Sealy Summer. Both came from the queen, an ethereal fae of sharp angles and radiant yet forbidding beauty. It was only in moments like this, standing opposite each other, locked in a minor battle of wills, that Aurelian ever saw such startling resemblance between the prince and his mother. That's enough, the queen continued. I've had it to hear with your conspiracies and your theories, and you're looking for trouble where trouble can't be found. Ariadne drew to full height, glaring down her nose at her much shorter son. It was an expression so stern that most people couldn't help but look away, and it was packed with all the intensity of the son the Seelie worshipped. Vahan always lasted longer under that stare than Aurelian expected him to, but even his gaze drifted downward eventually. When it did so now, the queen continued, only a touch more gracefully. I am proud of your bravery. I'm proud of your sense of duty to your people. It's very rewarding as a Sid Fey of the Seelie blood to see my son embody so much of what our people prize. But your obsession with following in the footsteps of our founders, your endless desire to play the hero, to mimic their acts of chivalry and valor, I fear one day your noble intentions will get you hurt, my love. Yes, hello, Pyro. The book goes. We're having trouble pronouncing names. These people, these Fae have very complicated names, and I don't know how to pronounce them. I'm probably pronouncing all of them wrong. Nausicaa is how I've been saying it. Is that's wrong because that's not how you said it, I don't think. I think you said, is it Nausicaa? Yeah, Nausicaa, okay. See, I just said Nausicaa when I first saw it. But now the second A makes sense, saying it Nausicaa. Now the problem is I'm not going to remember that's how it was pronounced next time I see that name in the book. Yeah, but if you're letting me read for you, I don't know how to pronounce things. There's a lot of plot lines in this book, I can't keep up. I mean, so far, Kei-chan, it's just, we're in a magical world and somebody's killing off the half-human, half-magical people. But how do you know that people reading that audiobook knew how to pronounce the names correctly? What if they didn't know how to read either? Yeah, it's a mystery, Kei-chan. We gotta figure out who's killing all the half-bloods. What are they calling them? The Ironborn? Yeah, Ironborn. I don't know what mythos means. This is a really short chapter. Should I read 2 chapters today? How long is the next chapter? I'm not going to read 10 chapters because that would be really long. It would definitely take me more than 15 minutes to read 10 chapters. Okay, well then I'm gonna get back to reading the book to entertain you. Well, hopefully I'll finish the chapter by then, Kei-chan. Yay, what a wonderful streamer. Riadne's hand relaxed to glide beneath Vahan's chin. She tilted his face up and to meet her gaze and smiled down at him. You don't want to make your mother worry, do you? Vahan sighed, and Aurelian, relieved, knew Vahan wouldn't press the issue further tonight. No, I don't. Good. Put all this nasty business of human disappearances and Ironburn murders from your mind. You're just a child, Vahan. This isn't your concern. You have so many other pressing matters to give our attention, besides, like my foyer. She turned back to her servants, and however soft her tone had grown for Vahan, the look in her eyes was still lightning fierce. Clean this up. She needed no threat to incentivize her staff. Yes, your majesty, the room echoed back at her. With one last glance at each of them, the queen turned and made her way back up the battered staircase she had installed upon her coronation, a feature famous throughout the courts for being made entirely of pure, gleaming iron. Aurelian suspected Riadne enjoyed watching each of her visitors and staff pretend it didn't sting a little just to walk them. Don't stay up much longer, Vahan, she added over her shoulder. You have school in the morning. If your grades fall for these antics, I will not be happy, with you or your retainer. Years ago, Aurelian might have flinched at this comment. Not anymore. They won't, Mother, I promise. I'll go right to bed, don't worry. Good night. Aurelian regarded Vahan as he watched his mother leave, the prince absently rubbing where she'd gripped his jaw. Do you know why I brought you here, Aurelian? No, Aurelian could never forget his first impression of the palace, nor the queen herself. There were times he forgot how young the crown prince was, how young they both were. There were times Aurelian looked at Vahan and longed to take him away from this life, from the danger constantly around him. It pressed in from every angle, from the radiant council of Seelie Summer, hoping to turn their future king into their puppet, from the conniving aunts and uncles and cousins just waiting for him to give them a single opportunity to narrow down the Seelie Summer's line of succession by one, from the other Seelie Summer royal families looking for any way to knock the Lesterns off the throne altogether and claim it for their own. There were times Aurelian longed to go back to the way things were between him and Vahan, though when they'd been younger and closer and so innocently intertwined, best friends who loved each other fiercely, to when Aurelian hadn't yet known the worst threat to Vahan was anyone the prince was fond of, hadn't yet known that Vahan's own mother would take those people and turn them into knives against her son's throat. I'll give you a hint. It had nothing to do with your parents. As the queen was out of sight, tension drained out of the room, but the silence lasted a few moments longer. Then, thank you, your highness. It was Tyrone, a young pixie girl not much older than Aurelian, but who'd only been here a year. She was shorter than Vahan, incredibly small-boned and slim, and while many fairies didn't feel the need to flaunt their power by keeping glamours up inside human-free spaces as the Fae did, Tyrone had gone to great lengths to keep her features human. Her hair mouse brown, wide eyes muted blue, her pastel pink skin and her wings, thin as spun sugar and lovely as stained glass, were the only evidence that she'd relented a little on a glamour that would take too much energy to fully maintain as long as the Fae did. Vahan turned around with a smile. Aurelian didn't have to see to know it packed more feeling than Riadne's own had shown, a smile Aurelian missed being able to return. No, you don't have to thank me, Tyrone. I'm sorry. Mother's in a bad mood lately. There's a lot of heat on her, what with the majority of the murders and disappearances happening here in our territory, and she really wants this year's solstice celebration to stand apart from all the others. The Dark Star better keep her head down for the next little while if she doesn't want it mounted on the ballroom wall. He laughed. Aurelian knew him too well to miss the awkwardness in it. I shouldn't have laughed, Tyrone replied miserably. No, she really shouldn't have. Aurelian had seen the queen pin fairies to those iron steps of hers for lesser insults, had seen Vahan wear punishment for standing against kinder moods. Tyrone owed the prince much more than her thanks, but Vahan wasn't the sort of Fae to capitalize on such debts. And that was the prince all over, much to Aurelian's frustration. He was too damn good, too damn eager to take care of others, no matter the cost to himself. No matter that Riadne saw this just as clearly as Aurelian did and used it constantly to her advantage. Ah, well, next time try to save it for when she's gone, okay? With a nod of her head and a bow that made her wings clip Vahan in the nose, Tyrone scrambled back to the others to help them repair the foyer. Silence stretched once more between Aurelian and Vahan. Sighing deeply, Aurelian stepped up beside Vahan and nodded after the pixie girl now darting glances Vahan's way. That's another you'll be seeing in line to dance with you at the solstice. There are worse things in life than having pretty people think you're charming. He positively beamed at Aurelian. It was false cheer, something Aurelian didn't buy for a moment. But even so, it was only thanks to years of practice that Aurelian was able to keep his show of indifference from cracking. He'd always been weak to the way a smile tugged at the prince's full mouth. Something of his frustration must have leaked through, though, because next Vahan added, "What, why are you looking at me like that?" Aurelian shook his head. It was uncommon for Fae to mature at 18, for them to come into their full power, for their aging to slow to a crawl, and their youthful human softness to start sharpening into true Fae beauty once the initial week-long phase of illness, mood swings, and temperamental magic passed. But Vahan's had hit the very day of his birthday a little over a month ago. It had been more or less the same for Aurelian, whose own 18th birthday had passed back in January, with maturity following a few weeks after. But Aurelian wasn't the prince of a court. He wouldn't be walking into this year's solstice with marriage painted like a target on his back. There was no doubt in him that part of Riadne's game this year was trying to use the solstice to arrange the best union possible, and who didn't want to play significant other to someone like Vahan Lestern, already well known for his looks and his kindness and princely demeanor. Hi, Scorn! Oh, yeah, I do need to do that, don't I? I completely forgot. Okay, K-Chan's a mod now. Good job, Pyro. You remembered. Hi, Scorn! Well, I mean, K-Chan just became mod, though. So, is Pyro still best mod? Yeah. Pyro and K-Chan sword fight. See, even Skarn says K-Chan is best mod. I don't even remember where I'm at now. Okay, that's where I'm at. Pyro, we love you. We're just joking. Pyro and K-Chan are both good mods. Neither of them is better than the other. Why would you do that? I'm just gonna give you mod back. Yeah, you can unmod yourself. Pyro, you're not allowed to resign. I'm just gonna give it back to you, whether you want it or not. Okay, bye, K-Chan. Yeah, good luck on your race. A true prince of light, his people called him. Aurelian wished he didn't agree. Fine, judge me in silence. I'm used to it, Vahan sighed. A bit of his fake cheer melted away. There was clearly something on his mind. What? Aurelian said before he could stop himself. He was going to regret asking, but as Vahan's retainer and steward in training, it was better to learn what was going on in the prince's head now rather than later. Vahan grinned. He looked at Aurelian in that odd way of his, as different from the way everyone else looked at him, as he had from their very first meeting. Aurelian Bezel was tall and lanky, a Lassid Fae born to steely autumn parents who'd moved here to Nevada from Germany when he'd been all of 11. He was quiet, aloof, and exceedingly intelligent, a genius both in Fae and human standards, all modesty aside, though his parents had tried very hard to dissuade him from the latter. In his human glamour, he was lightly tanned with a delicate jaw, strong features, and dark brown hair shaved to stubble around his neck and ears. It was left longer on the top of his head and dyed a smoky lavender, and his current favorite style was to sweep it toward his thick brows. Recent years had added piercings up the outer shell of his ears and an entire sleeve of tattoos, black and brown foliage etched in ink, the colors of his native court. They covered his right hand like a glove and stretched all the way up from his fingers to his shoulder blade. It hadn't been hard to find a fairy willing to do this, despite his being 16 when he'd gone to them, but it had certainly earned him no small amount of grief from nearly every adult in his life, and many of their peers, much the way the rest of him did, from everyone except Vaughn. Yo, Aurelian sounds hot. Yes, Pyro, you're best mod. It's okay. I was just joking. Pyro is best mod. Fuck old people, what? Oh, okay. Well, I think he sounds hot. Exactly. I've already forgotten where I'm at again. When Vahan looked at Aurelian, looked at him, not simply turned attention his way, it was the only time Aurelian was ever caught off guard enough to let himself wonder what things might be like if he were different. If we were a little less observant, a little less rebellious, a little more like what Riadne and her underlings wanted as partner for her son, pliable. If only being that partner wouldn't turn him into one more tool for control over Vahan. Oh, it's nothing really, Vahan trailed off slyly. Aurelian frowned. Cut the wordplay or let me go to bed. Well, you heard my mother, didn't you? Yes, she's going to skin you and wear you as her dress for the solstice if you distract any more of her staff. Are we done here? Okay. Vahan said this too brightly. It had been too simple, and Aurelian felt a headache bloom in his temples. What? It's just we've been looking for trouble in all the wrong places. Aurelian didn't require an explanation. The courts can track you now, you remember that, right? You've matured. We both have. If you're thinking of going somewhere we're not supposed to be, Aurelian glared at him. I am the courts, and I agree. We've been looking for trouble where trouble can't be found. It's time to start looking in places it can be. That grin of Vahan's unspooled even wider, and Aurelian felt all hope of getting any proper sleep tonight unravel with it. I wonder why you have a headache, Pyro. You are the Senate? Alright, well that was the end of chapter 2. There's like 18, 19 pages in chapter 3. Nope-de-dopes! Hello, nope-de-dopes. Yeah, it was probably the alcohol, Pyro. Good. Good, you need water. Nope-de-dope, should we read another chapter? I'm fine with continuing. Alright, Nope-de-dope says go for it, so we're gonna go for it, because chapter 2 was very short. And I haven't even read for 25 minutes, actually. I've only read for 20. So we're going to start chapter 3, which is titled Nausicaa. And I pronounced it correctly this time. Yeah, peer pressure. I don't work tomorrow, so it's fine. If there was anything Nausicaa had learned in the past 116 years on Earth, and the almost 300 she'd been alive, it was that revenge was not a cure for pain, but exacting it did make her smile. However irritated she still was that her name had been dragged into this bunch of dead Ironborn business. She didn't kill innocent people, thank you very much. There was already enough blood on her hands, even if she'd never regret certain stains. Taking time out of her busy schedule to remind the courts what she was about had been worth Queen Riadne's expression when she tore into her precious palace foyer to discover a bull troll knocking around. The Iron Queen and the infamous Dark Star, Nausicaa sighed, tilting her head to the starry sky. Now there would be a fight. Sucks we had to leave. I'm almost feeling an emotion about it. More than a century into her banishment, and still Nausicaa had yet to satisfy her anger with her immortal family. She'd done numerous things to make them regret sending her here, to make them wish they'd sentenced her to destruction instead. She had her morals, the whole one or two of them that stubbornly clung to existence. Apart from her refusal to be the cause of any more unwarranted death, she also tried to keep out of dark magic, if only because no one had done anything about her previous attempts. For zero reward, it wasn't worth the hassle. But when she wasn't trying to trick the magical community into revealing themselves to the humans they lived alongside or poke the heads of the courts to watch them buzz in agitation, she was baiting hothead deities by torching their already neglected shrines, defacing their once glorious temples, now little better than curious tourist attractions, and stirring up trouble among their followers in an attempt to weave doubt in mortal belief. The one thing that sustained the deities and the one thing that the treaty of peace between the immortal and mortal realms hinged on. A 15-hour book? What happened? It's 19 and a half hours to read the book? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, we're reading A Dark and Hollow Star by Ashley Shuttleworth? Yeah, Ashley Shuttleworth. The audiobook is 19 and a half hours. How many minutes is that? I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to finish this in 19 and a half hours. Oh, okay. Did you think I was going to sit here and read the whole book just nonstop? Because I don't think I could do that. Yep, those are numbers, Pyro. Good job. I guess you did, Pyro. I don't know what's happening. I've lost my place again. Okay. Her brand of chaos was exactly that, chaos. It wasn't picking off the magical community's children. But maybe it fucking should be, she mumbled to herself, kicking a stone on the path where she stood, which led from the town behind her and into a vast, dense forest ahead. They were already terrified of her, the mortals. In the rare instances she allowed them to capture her, less and less as time wore on, just for a change of pace, it had been with the hope that someone would prove interesting, that someone would brave the violence and rot in her magical aura, a reflection of her mental state she didn't care to examine. To look her in the eye and do something other than tremble, or cower, or declare her not worth the effort to reprimand. A lost cause. Maybe she should embrace what both the realms now thought of her. But But that was a depressing line of thought she didn't feel like venturing down. Not at the moment. Not with the happy memory of Riadne's rage still fresh in her mind. Turning to her partner in tonight's crime, Nausicaa allowed her grin to spread wider. You weren't half bad, you know, for a troll. Maybe I should team up with others more often. She tapped her chin in a show of thought. The troll standing across from her, looking around in confusion, had been the first exception to her lone wolf rule in well over 50 years. She didn't like working with other people. Other people were complicated, and everything seemed to be about feelings with them. Nausicaa didn't have room in her life for that nonsense. Besides, she'd had friends, many of them, once upon a time. She'd been well liked by her immortal people before everything that had happened after Tisiphane's death. A lot of good that had done her in the end, and good riddance, really. 24-hour Chica reading stream? No, I could not do that. But trolls were stupid, bull trolls especially. This one in particular clearly valued brawn over brains, towering over her own 6'2" height somewhere off into 8 feet tall. He was squash-faced with skin the color of old gray porridge and every bit as lumpy. His yellowing tusks protruded from his mouth, pointed black horns grew from his temples. He was big as he was strong, all too ready to take a swing at her when she'd arrived in his forest to forge their temporary union. No, Gar. At least that's what she made of the sound he'd made when she asked for his name. Wasn't going to try to make this anything other than what it was, and all it had taken to win his cooperation had been 3 cows and the promise he could smash a pretty building. Wrong. Nausicaa dropped her hand from her chin. Say what now? Wrong. Forest. Wrong. The troll's confusion had morphed into agitation. It wasn't surprising. While Gar was leaps and bounds more intelligent than many of his brethren, the fact that he cared enough to learn words in human English was proof of that fact. Popping him out of his home in the tucked-away town of Darrington, Washington, and whisking him all the way to Paradise, Nevada, then all the way home again, was definitely too much for so little brain power to process. And trolls had a tendency to lash out at things that overwhelmed them. Yo, trolls are autistic. They have a meltdown when overwhelmed. Excuse you, it is not. The troll made a grumbling noise that sounded a lot like grating rock. Listen, this is the right forest, and before you get any big ideas there, pal, I'll have you know your first shot was free, but if you take another fucking swing at me, I'll— No, not wrong, Forest. Forest. Forest is wrong. Nausicaa paused, then looked around. Darrington sat in a cradle of snow-capped mountains and emerald forests wrapped around the city's limits. It boasted no more than a handful of homes and necessary buildings. The air was rich and clean and fragrant with moss and wood, and the late hour meant there was very little movement apart from the rustle of leaves and the breeze that stirred them. Nausicaa hadn't been paying attention. She'd missed the signs of magic altogether, so naturally whimsical was this place under night's veil. Plus, when she'd been banished to the mortal realm, the majority of her immortal powers had been stripped of her, as was the case for all who dared to come here uninvited. Her ability to sense magic was woefully diminished, but so concentrated was it in the air here that she now wondered how she had missed it. Magic. It was there in that telltale tinkling, soft as glass chimes. It was there in that spark she tasted on her tongue and in the vibrancy of her surroundings. It was there in the deity's damned fog, spilling over the cusp of the woods to swirl around her boots. The narrow strip of trampled dirt that stretched between a row of slumbering houses and Darrington High's football field was barely wide enough to accommodate them. But it was about to get even more crowded if the tendrils of mist curling around her legs were what she thought they were. Changelings. What are they doing here? Most wrote these particular fairies off as tricksters, too preoccupied with games to be of much use. The belief had once been that fairies would grow more resilient to iron if they were raised by human hands, and so some parents had disguised and swapped their offspring at birth for human children. In theory, when the fairy was grown, their parents would reverse the trade and neither would be the worse for wear. Except in practice, it all went to shit. Most of the children, both fairy and human, ended up dying, the ones who survived. Magic had its rules, and woe betide anyone who tried to sidestep them. Nausicaa is hot? I'm sure. Probably everyone in this book is hot. I don't think they've actually described what Nausicaa looks like yet, though. If they did, I don't remember. The children, both fairy and human, were never returned to their families. In retribution for trying to outsmart magic itself, both were instead stolen away by it, claimed and trapped forever in their youth and raised by the wild. Nobody and nothing else were quite so connected to magic, pure magic, as these wayward wraiths of the woods. If changelings were here in Darrington and mucking about, it was because something else had attracted magic's notice. Something dark, something unnatural, something with great potential for upheaval. Nausicaa thought quite highly of her own proficiency in these areas, but she knew it wasn't her they were swarming to tonight. But if it isn't me... She looked back at the troll. Gar had shrunken a few steps back, and she couldn't have that. As fun as it would be to set him loose a second time and prod the Seelie Summer hive again, a confused troll was dangerous, a scared one was deadly. To me, Gar, she commanded, employing a bit of her former furious tone. Gar shuffled forward. Forest is wrong. Yeah, I can feel that now. Don't worry, handsome, I'll walk you home. She flicked open her hand. In her palm, a ball of fire sparked to life. The flame was small, as weak as Nausicaa was herself these days, but it was fire unlike anything this realm could conjure. Livid red and seething orange and boiling furious gold, it was the element from which she'd been created by Uriel so many years ago. She watched this ball of fire burn for all of a minute before returning her gaze to her forest. Wrong indeed. She might not be able to sense magical auras as profoundly as she once had, but regular odors she could smell just fine, and what currently lurked in the air's undercurrent was one that even a human couldn't miss. Something heavy, rancid, like gore and sewage and dead fish left to bake in briny air. It was disgusting, and familiar, now that she had some time to think. And if that thinking was correct, she hadn't encountered an odor like this in hells since she'd been Electo, too long. But a reaper. The scant few left of their kind were long forbidden to come anywhere near court territory, but here one was, skulking around smack dab in the middle of it. Interesting. A former fury and a reaper. What if they could join forces? Reapers weren't known for their temperance, and neither was Nausicaa, but the chaos they could inflict with each other's aid. Would it finally be enough for the courts to demand immortal interference? Would it finally be the deed that made her mother admit there was no reforming Nausicaa's ways? It was dangerous. It was dark. It was the path Nausicaa had been avoiding to get her way. The one that ended in significant innocent casualties. But if this realm was too determined to already smear her with that evil, I think this Reaper and I need to have a chat. She lowered her hand. The flame in her palm lingered a moment in the air, then took on a life of its own. It floated to the space above her shoulder, swirling and churning and spitting out sparks like a miniature sun. The pool of light it spilled at her feet made the fog there flinch back. Fog was the best indication of the presence of changelings. It was their favorite place to hide and execute their trickeries. The thicker the fog, the bigger the gathering, as went the general rule. Right now, the opaque mist swirling through the forest was dense enough to white out all but the first row of trees. Anyone foolish enough to wander into that mess deserved what they got. Even the humans they often went against court law to toy with would take one look at it and turn right back around. Nausicaa plunged forward, stepping off the path at last and advancing into the forest. Gar followed behind, however reluctantly. The fog retreated, parting around her light. Visibility was still limited, though, and trees kept popping at her out of nowhere, forcing Nausicaa to be way more careful than she usually was. One step. Two. The first leg of her journey seemed to wear on forever and began to feel almost suffocating, with all that white pressing in on her from every side. There was no telling how far this fog stretched, nor indeed if it would let up at all or continue until she stumbled across what she was after. Her ball of fire and innate sense of direction could only take her so far, and while a bit of determination often saw her through to the other side of the changeling's little games, this particular prank seemed to want to keep her. Alright, listen. She came to a halt. Gar and the fireball, too. And the fog inched closer. What's going on? I'm all for throwing around dramatic effect, but there's an uber-dark creature of terrifying death running around this forest. Not to mention a reaper. And I don't get in the way of your fun, so what gives? For a moment, the fog remained unmoved. It sat around, swirling in place, very clearly listening, but showing no sign of offering answers. Then, just as Nausicaa began to contemplate conjuring a few more fireballs, the fog began to thin. Little by little, it drained from the air until finally all that was left of it was a vaguely damp, translucent haze. She could only stare at what was revealed. Huh, she breathed when speech at last overcame her surprise. This is new. It wasn't just the changelings that had gathered. They were present, of course, one a mere step away. Nausicaa briefly took in the unmistakable, pale green tint of his fawn brown skin and the snaking twist of ivory that grew from the sharp flares of his little shoulders. But there were others. There were so many others. In all of Nausicaa's very long life, she had never encountered so many of Magic's children in one place. Go to sleep, Pyro, if you're sleepy. The crowd of them stretched far in almost every direction, faces of all shapes and sizes peeking out of and around the foliage and trees. There were centaurs, goblins, brownies, imps, and sprites. There were redcaps with their crimson-stained hats and vicious sighs, which glinted in flecks of moonlight. There were kelpies dripping sodden weeds, lilies strangled in their manes. Littered throughout the branches above were crows that weren't really crows at all, but slog? Wandering souls of violent dead who preyed on those soon to die. Interesting, I've never heard of that creature before. Oh, we're gonna have an ad in like 30 seconds. There were larger things too, unnameable things. Things that had undoubtedly been calling this forest their home long before Nausicaa had even been born. She narrowed her eyes at the distance. Something massive as a mobile hill stood still as silence too far away for mortal eyes to see. Their form was not unlike an overlarge poisonous tree frog, all vibrant blues and yellows and greens, a crown of velvet antlers on their head and hundreds of glittering black eyes on their face. A freaking forest guardian, she would hazard as a guess. Not that she'd ever seen one to say for sure. Okay, well, weird time to have a company meeting, but you do you, I guess. I'm going to go. Gar, maybe it's best you stick with these guys until I square things up with my Reaper. Thanks for lifting the fog, forest brats. Good luck with whatever this is. May the force be with you. She turned back around. There weren't any fairies in front of her, no movement either. Just trees and misty gloom and a darkness unnatural even for this time of night. And of course the glass chime tinkling of magic, which now sounded to her a bit distressed. 1 step. 2. Nausicaa didn't have to look behind her to know the entirety of the forest occupants followed, however cautiously. Another step. 4. Spell it? Spell what? What am I spelling? Are you talking about the creature I haven't heard of? The crows? The slog? If that's how you say it. It's Slugh. That word. Slog? That's a creature I haven't heard of before. Okay, thanks, Pyro. I mean, it told me what the creature is. I know what the creature is, because it said what it was. I've just never heard of that one before. She halted. Rolling her eyes, she rolled on her heels with every intention of snapping at her unwelcome entourage. But just as her gaze locked with the ivory-bound changeling form before, she realized at last what she'd missed. Something else hung in the air, familiar and as tart to the taste as battery acid. She almost couldn't believe it. You're afraid. This wasn't some clandestine meeting of powers, some odd sorts troop of fairies drawn by curiosity and sport. This was fear. This was huddling together and hiding. She hadn't noticed. Fear was something Nausicaa inspired. It wasn't something she felt. This wasn't the first time she'd dared to wander into the depths of horror. It wouldn't be the last. But everything here, this all against some measly one. Nausicaa wrapped her arms around her middle and doubled over in laughter. Holy crap, you're all afraid? Seriously? Of what? You can't tell me none of you have ever met a Reaper before. It had to be what the Reaper was up to that made these fairies so uneasy, but that only made Nausicaa even more intrigued, even more excited to talk with it. A shriek from deep in the forest rent the air, sudden, loud, and suspiciously delighted. Nausicaa's laughter died abruptly. This was wasting her time. If she spent any longer with these terrified fairies, she wouldn't be able to capitalize on their misfortune. Reapers had the ability to camouflage completely with their surroundings, almost to the point of turning invisible. And they were wicked fast, able to cross impossible distances in impossibly short bits of time. She didn't want her hopeful business partner to get away before she could speak with it. Gotta go, she clipped. FYI, you're all a bunch of cowards. A hand snagged her own. She looked at the tiny green fingers that stopped her, then up at the face of the changeling to whom they belonged. The one with the ivy, Haru he was called, if memory served her correctly. She knew several of these tiny disasters by name for how often she encountered them bouncing around the world. I don't have time for this. It's dangerous, Nausicaa. Haru's voice was a quiet, steady presence in her mind, incongruous with the mood around them. Yeah, story of my life. I'll live. Haru's hand gripped tighter to hers. I'll come with you. Nausicaa bit her lip against a swell of something that felt, again, too much like emotion, evoked by a memory she quickly repressed. Stupid forest kids. Tisiphone had always been fond of them, the way she'd been fond of anything she saw to be abandoned and alone. Oh my gods, fine, but can we actually go now? The changeling nodded. Dirt streaked his green-tinged skin. His clothing was little better than tattered rags, dated now. It was rare that fairies left children to become changelings anymore, and Haru was one of the last from the time no one knew that's what they'd become. The deep black nest of hair on his head was tangled with leaves, twigs, and carcasses of insects. Haru looked every inch a 10-year-old boy claimed by nature, but Nausicaa knew better than to argue with the changeling's conviction. They set off at a run. The fireball followed, and so did the fairies, a little more eagerly now. It was much easier to traverse the darkness with the fog gone, and Haru seemed to know his way around better than she did. They moved at unnatural speed, weaving through trees, and in no time all reached a clearing. Nausicaa would have barreled on in if it weren't for Haru digging his heels into the dirt. The sudden stop wrenched her arm painfully behind her, drawing a snarl from her chest. She rounded on him, but all Haru did in response was stare over her shoulder. They were too late. Yeah, she a bad bitch. Oh, you would say slough? Maybe. That sounds more right. I don't know. The clearing was empty, of the living at least. The Reaper was gone, leaving behind only carnage. Extracting herself from Haru's hold, Nausicaa stepped through the trees. The scene was oddly beautiful, as much as it was also grotesque. The discarded limbs, the drape of lifeless bodies, the splashes of chlorée across a shadow-swallowed canvas of muted brown and green. It all made this into some romanticized painting of death. The strewn little corpses were easily recognizable as changelings either foolish enough to intervene in what had happened here tonight, or too slow to get away. But the epicenter of this terrible tableau was something else. Carving her way between the gore, Nausicaa crouched by the remains of a brown-haired teenage boy. She doubted very much he'd come into the woods of his own accord. More likely he was chased by the very thing that had torn his limbs from his torso and cracked open the cage of his ribs, spreading them like a parody of wings. Reapers. They didn't tend to go after humans. The preferred prey were the folk, particularly folk who practiced dark magic. In Nausicaa's previous life, when she'd been a fury and it had been up to her to police the use of such things, reapers had been a signal they looked out for. And perhaps that was why the mortals had been so keen to chase them away. Less reapers, less chance of fury would catch you doing something you shouldn't. Plus, reapers were notorious in the community as fairy cannibals that had once been fairies themselves, now devoured and twisted by the same dark magic they dared to once use. Hang on. Nausicaa examined the body closer. She couldn't sense this boy's magical aura by smell anymore, but it still had a taste on the back of her tongue, bitter and slightly metallic. Are you Ironborn? She hadn't been following the crime she'd been accused of too closely, all that stuff about the Ironborn murders. There were always something going on in the mortal realm. Always some war, some disagreement, some atrocious act that only reinforced her decision to keep from getting too involved with humans or the magical community. What little she knew was thanks to the assistants and their tireless efforts to keep this in circulation. And the state of the body before her, it looked an awful lot like every single case they'd reported so far. WT fuck. That is the weirdest way I've seen someone say that. Usually you say WTF or what the fuck. But this says WT fuck. There was something on the boy's chest, revealed under tattered clothing. Broken bones, coagulating blood. It was difficult to piece together the shreds of the body's skin to make out what the symbol was, but something was stamped on his chest as though branded. Something that, in the back of Nausicaa's considerably large collection of random knowledge, struck her an awful lot like an alchemic array. Alchemic array? I think, actually. It wasn't unheard of. She'd encountered many Ironborn who still practiced alchemy in secret despite the laws that forbade it. But this array in particular, the bits she was able to match together. Blowing out her cheeks, she reached over to close the two young boys' open glassy eyes. Then using her teeth to pull an elastic off her wrist, she tied back her shoulder-length white sand hair and plunged her hand unceremoniously into the young man's chest. What are you doing? Haru was suddenly at her side, watching her rummage through organs with no small amount of curiosity. Nausicaa angled a grin at him, the sort that would have made anyone else shrink warily back. But Haru merely cocked his head. Spelunking? With a sickening squelch, she pulled her hand back out, something too hard and smooth and cold to be a heart in her grasp. Yet a heart it had been. Now it looked more like a polished hunk of gray stone, twisted up in tubes, but at its core it glowed red and bright as a candied apple. The glow faded quickly, but it was proof that Nausicaa had been right. This boy was Ironborn. Her Reaper was behind these attacks, but it wasn't the true culprit. Someone had to be using it, had teamed up with it as Nausicaa had intended herself. The trade of food, her service too tempting for these starving creatures to ignore, because no solo Reaper would risk drawing as much attention as this and holy effing shit. This stone in her hand. It wasn't just the work of alchemy. It was... Oh shit. Are you gonna eat that organ? Well, it's rock hard, so... It's irony because you censor the words that aren't curses. If you say so. I've just never heard that expressed like that. My nose is itchy. Oh, I was gonna see how many more pages we have. Just a few. Okay. Yeah, quote 20. Put it down. Nausicaa froze. A few seconds ticked by. She took a steadying breath, clamped down on the immediate swell of fury that voice behind her ignited, then unfurled herself to full height. She turned around, petrified heart in her hand, dripping blood, gore slathered up to her elbow. Hello, Meg. How long had it been since she'd last spoken with her sister? Megara stood before her, dressed in human glamour, though not exactly blood-related. It was Uriel who gave them life, yes, but only by way of her magic. They were incredibly similar in appearance, with their matching gray metal eyes, shapely, strong builds, and features sharp as knives. But Nausicaa was blonde and sun-tanned gold, and wore combat boots, tight jeans, and a leather jacket, all of which was black. Yo, okay, so Nausicaa does sound hot. Megara's hair was long, the blue-black color of ink, and in her favored glamour of silver-iced skin, pale as a corpse, her only covering a purple slip of silk that highlighted every curve. Yo, Meg sounds hot too. Oh, it's the same Meg from Hercules? It sounded like it. The description, the clothing, the name. Meg is hot. Put it down and step away. You have no business here. There was nothing soft about Megara's imperious tone, however quiet it was. Even Haru had retracted a step from them, wary of the being who was tasked with making sure that the two realms of this universe followed magic's laws. Nausicaa grinned, tossing the heart she held in the air and catching it as it fell. Why don't you make me? Megara's face hardened even further. I am not here to play games, Nausicaa. Put down that heart and leave. I will not ask you again. She considered the heart she continued to play with and the barely contained disapproval on Megara's face. Yeah, no, I think I'll keep it. Say, did you know there's been a murder in these woods? She stepped aside, pulling a look of deep alarm, and pointed down at the heap of flesh and bone that had once been a boy. It looks like a case of dark magic. Isn't your job to, look into that? She cocked her head, glancing back at Megara, her smile nothing but innocent. Yeah, let me think. I've read something about this somewhere. The three Furies, Alecto, Tisiphone, Megara. They police the realms and punish anyone they catch breaking the three principles of magic. She raised a hand to visibly count off the laws that had once been up to her to maintain. 1. Thou shalt not use magic to alter someone's destiny without permission of the Titans. 2. Thou shalt not use magic to completely strip away free will. And 3. Thou extra super shall not use magic to bring someone back from the grave, or put them in one. She paused to let a little of her ever-burning anger touch the edges of her mouth, curling it like the scorched ends of paper into something more resembling a smirk. I'm feeling a bit of deja vu here. You, me, a bunch of dead bodies. Hang on, let me light something on fire for old time's sake. Nausicaa, that is enough. Megara surged forward and took hold of Nausicaa's arm. The heart she caught only moments before fell to the forest floor, and if Nausicaa were the mortal she was halfway to being, the strength in those bone-slime fingers would have crushed her wrist to dust. There was nothing kind in the cold depths of Megara's stare, no hint of warmth in her glacial expression. But then again, just as Nausicaa had been forged in flames, Megara had been carved from ice. Even when they'd been close, there had never been much kindness or warmth between them. What is a philosopher's stone doing inside this mortal child? Oh! That's a good question. Why is there a philosopher's stone inside of him? That's interesting. Who's sassy? Meg or Nausicaa? Or both? They both kind of sound a little sassy. Nausicaa held her ground but abandoned her teasing at last. Wholly serious for what was probably the first time since coming to this stupid forest, she matched her sister's glare with one of her own. I already told you. This is unbelievably dark magic. What's going on? Yeah, Full Metal Alchemist. It's none of your business. We don't come to the mortal realm to keep mortals from making poor choices. That's part of the treaty. Part of what allows us to keep our powers when we're here. We can't interfere, can't take away the choice to fall, can only act once the deed violates the principles. But this, Nausicaa waved her hand at the boy's body, has happened before, and it almost cost this realm everything when just one of these things was created. And this time, even after several murdered Ironborn, there was not a single word from the immortal realm to warn this one. The mortals are playing this off as the work of a human serial killer, Meg. Megara's eyes narrowed. You are not one of us. There is no we anymore, Nausicaa. It was almost as though the entire forest stopped breathing. The critters, fairies, and trees alike. There was silence, and then there was this. Nausicaa worked harder than she'd ever admit to keep her face from showing the pain and loss she felt just from seeing Megara again. True, Nausicaa is a mood. Good riddance, she reminded herself. You don't need any of them. This is big, Meg. Please tell me you've at least told the High King. The dreadful not silence lasted a full minute longer. Then Megara released her hold. She said nothing, only bent to fetch the Iron Boy's heart and return it to his chest. I can take you to find your answers. Megara stood. Nausicaa turned to Haru, but not before she caught a glimpse of what was almost curiosity in her sister's watchful gaze. You know what that is? She pointed to the Ironborn, to the thing inside him that was now more stone than heart. Haru nodded. You heard my sister. This isn't my business, and to be perfectly honest, I don't actually care. My field of fucks to give to the mortals and their problems. Oh, okay. I was confused by that sentence because it's a question. My field of fucks to give to the mortals and their problems? Barren, burned, and salted. But let's say I was really curious to know where that Reaper might go. Let's say it might be interesting to know who's behind this bit of ambition. Eternity is a very long time, and a girl gets bored, so I'd be in your debt if you could point me in the right direction. Fairies were all about debt. There was no such thing as a gift or good deed where they were concerned. A favor done meant a favor in return. It was a foolish bargainer who left the particulars vague, because what fairies loved even more than racking up debts was warping them into a guise? Those promises imbued with magic that would result in great torment if those particulars were not met. Nausicaa didn't bind herself to debt for just anything. Haru would be one of an extremely rare few who could call in a favor with the former Fury. He turned his head to look past her, obnoxiously insensible to the great honor he was about to receive. Other changelings crept from the woods now that they saw it was safe to do so. They made for their fallen to remove them from this scene before it was inevitably discovered. I'm sorry about your friends, she said a little awkwardly, noticing where his intention had drifted. It earned a snort from Megara, probably unable to believe the comment was genuine. My family. Nausicaa swallowed around an infuriating emotion that was once again trying to be acknowledged. Yeah, that. If I take you where you need to go, will you help? Help? That's not really what I do. Help people. Not really my thing. And I was kind of after this Reaper to stir up trouble of my own, so... This escalating situation wasn't something she wanted any part in. You'll help. I'll take you. What? Nausicaa looked up from the ground, where her thoughts had pulled her gaze. Changelings were smart. They were also prescient? She didn't like where this was heading. She's gay, so she needs to talk like that? If you say so. I'll help you now, and you'll pass that help on. Those are the terms of my trade, and I already know you'll accept. Oh yeah? And to whom am I providing the service exactly? You'll know when you meet them. Haru extended his hand, the ivory around it writhing. It would be foolish to turn her nose up at this offer. Haru wasn't trapping her in anything too difficult to minimize. Help was a broad term, doled out in various ways. Accepting his trade was very little skin off Nausicaa's back, and in return she might just be able to learn something useful. The higher-ups were anxious, judging by Megara's appearance here, and maybe hoping to help Nausicaa from getting involved herself with how little her sister was willing to yield. This was enough for her, and yet she hesitated. Haru seemed strangely convinced Nausicaa would want to help whoever it was needing her assistance, despite her insistence otherwise. Even after 116 years, her rage was still as all-consuming as it had been that fateful night long ago. All those years and the pain of being torn in half, the ruthless agony of losing her sister, which rent and shredded and hacked apart her very soul, still plagued every step, every breath, and every beat of her heart. She didn't want to get involved with anyone ever again. She would not want to help Haru's charity case, no matter who they were. Deal. The abruptness of Megara's response startled Nausicaa. She looked at her sister, whose arms were now folded across her chest, a haughty expression on her face that was so typically her. Nausicaa could have laughed. Instead, she groaned. "Oh my gods, Meg, he wasn't talking to you." "I'm coming too." Megara's tone held no room for argument. "Nausicaa will pay your price, changeling, and I will permit you to escort the both of us to where the Reaper has gone. I would like to know that answer myself." She turned to Nausicaa. "Agreed?" Fine. Yes, agreed." Nausicaa took Haru's hand. Megara took the other. The fog returned, spilling from the forest like a flood. She felt it sweep her into its current, and then watched as Darrington disappeared into the mist. The fog receded. The rushing in Nausicaa's ears softened to the tinkling of glass chimes. When she was able to focus again, she realized she stood now in some street corner park. The grass beneath her boots was dewy, the air heavy with the scent and taste of iron, rain, and damp stone. She looked up, past the crawl of cars on a surprisingly busy street, to a mass of towering buildings. It was impossible to see how high they reached, devoured as they were by the low-hanging ceiling of clouds. What was visible of their metal-plated skeletons glinted dully in the fog-muted dawn. None of it looked familiar. "And this is—" She turned to Haru, hoping he'd supply that answer, but already he'd begun to fade into the haze that lingered around him. "Hey, wait, where the fuck did you take me, forest brat?" "Remember our deal." "Haru, don't you dare." He vanished. "If I find you poking any further into this, there will be consequences, Nausicaa." Megara vanished almost as quickly, her glamour slipping just enough to reveal great wings unfurling behind her. They wrapped around her body and compressed her down to nothing, and she was gone just as abruptly as she'd come. Nausicaa growled. Reaching into the inner pocket of her leather jacket, she fished out her phone. Thank goodness for modern technology. Let's see. Location. Google Maps would obligingly answer the question. Hold up, Toronto? What the hell? I hate when they, cut off words with a dash in the middle, because it makes it harder to read the word. Toronto, a bustling hub of human activity to the untrained eye, capital of unseelie spring and the entire courts of folk to the magical community. It was a city that even a former fury would be disinclined to mess with, what with the famed viciousness of the unseelie brand of fairies, the particularly powerful magic of the spring court, and the bloody high king. That a reaper would venture here was unlikely, not without reinforcements at least. Not without something here to protect it. Haru wouldn't steer her wrong, which meant that someone else here had a very high opinion of themselves. Someone else here thought they were strong enough to make a mess in the High King's house and get away with it. Interesting, Nausicaa clicked off her phone. Interesting and stupid. And very, very promising. In the pit of her ravaged heart, Nausicaa thought she felt something a little bit like joy. "So you don't want me to get involved. Consequences, you say. I wonder, what am I going to find if I track down this Reaper before you, Megara?" What sort of chaos was brewing that needed an actual fucking Philosopher's Stone for fuel? That Ironborn's heart. It wasn't a full-fledged stone. Hadn't been strong enough to survive the process of becoming one. She really didn't approve of all this killing, but how pissed would the deities be if she lent the many things she knew about this legend to the person attempting to make it real? Not that she particularly wanted to do that, but if her immortal jailers thought she could. Options. So many options to make them regret sending her here. But why? Why? Was no one as properly panicked as they should be that this was going on? One stone created centuries ago, and the courts of folk had been so afraid that they'd shut down the practice of alchemy altogether. This veritable silence on that magic's apparent return meant no one knew. They couldn't, not after last time, not after the fear that haunted them even now. Interesting, Nausicaa repeated. Alright, well, first things first. Let's see what sort of person you are, my mysterious, murderous entrepreneur. Shoving her hands into her pockets, she set off into the heart of Toronto. If she didn't know better, she could almost swear it was luck she had to thank for this exciting turn of affairs. Ah, well that's the end of chapter 3. Things are starting to get interesting now. Oh, where'd my timer go? EP. Okay. Is Moop still streaming? Yeah, Moop's still streaming. Oh no. I heard my own stream for a second. Yeah, there's the raid message. Thank you, Nopty Dopes. You have a good one as well. That's not what I wanted to click. That's not what I want. I want to raid. Yeah, Spyro is best mod. Oh my gosh, my nose is so itchy. We read for an hour today. But it was good chapters. Good stuff going on. If you say so. I'm not good at reading, especially aloud. But of course we'll be reading again tomorrow. And also tomorrow after reading, we're going to be playing Wobbly Life with K-chan. Pyro, shout out K-chan real quick before we raid. Thank you, Nopty Dopes. Well, fine. Don't then.
Excuse me.
Or do.
What in the heck was that?
What in the heck?
Alright, I'm gonna have to remember that for later.
Oh, now that I can't see the raid thing. I don't know when the raid's gonna go through now. Oh, it's also over here. Okay, it's in like 5 seconds. Alright, bye!